Well, hot damn, we are back. Episode 319 of the Vinyl Guide. It's part 2 of our extra long chat with Aussie rock legend Dave Tice. And if you haven't heard part 1 yet, episode 318, you're going to want to go back and do that now. Dave shared lots of stories from the Buffalo days, talked about the rare records, and lots more. And we got a whole bunch coming up in today's episode too. Dave came over to my house now many months ago, right before the big Australian lockdowns, and I finally had a chance to pull it all together right in time to tell you about the new LP from Buffalo Revisited. Volcanic Rock Live is a new recording of Buffalo's Volcanic Rock, the album that rock fans still point to decades later as one of the many high points of Australian music history. Buffalo Revisited Volcanic Rock Live is out soon on Ripple Music, but you can order some of the limited vinyl pressings now at ripple-music.com and even dial up a track or two on your streaming services to hear a bit of it now. That's Buffalo Revisited Volcanic Rock Live, available from ripple-music.com. Oh, and hey, real quick, can you do me a favor? If you like what we do here on the Vinyl Guide, please leave us a positive review on iTunes. It'll only take 2 minutes. Just search up Vinyl Guide on iTunes, rate us 5 out of 5 stars, give us some high praise, and that always helps. Much appreciated. All right, with that, let's get into part 2 of our conversation with Aussie music legend, Mr. Dave Tice. No limits. So you moved to the UK for the Count Bishops. Now, was that Paul calling you with the gig?
A little more complicated than that, because we'd pretty much finished recording of the Average Rock and Roller album, and Paul, who had been the drummer on Dead Forever, as you know, had been in England for some time and become a part of the Count Bishops. He came back to Australia for a family visit, and they'd already been putting down, you know, the instrumental tracks for the Count Bishop's first album. And of course, we're old mates, you know, and we got together socially and talked about what we were doing, as you do. And he said, oh, you know, we're doing this album at the moment. We had a singer before, but we sacked him because when we got him in the studio, we found he couldn't carry a tune. Mind you, he was a great performer, this bloke. Right. He was dynamite on stage. But so they'd been working as a four-piece for a while, and they really felt they needed a front-man singer. And I said, well, that sounds kind of interesting. You know, I said, I'm getting sick and tired of what they're trying to make us do with Buffalo now. I've had enough of it. And he said, well, give me some stuff that you've done. I'll take it back with me to England. When I go back, play it for the boys and see what they think. And I thought, well, probably won't hear any more about that. You know? Right. But, you know, within days of him getting back, I was contacted by Chiswick, the record company, and they want him to go over. And I thought, wow, this is weird, man. I thought, they must have singers in England, or there must be plenty of singers around. Why would they need to bring me over? But that's the way it worked out, you know. So I said, look, this is what I never wanted to hold back. I said, this is what I want. I want return airfares, just in case it doesn't work out. And I want some guarantees, you know, for the time that I'm there. They came back and said, oh, no, we're not going to give you a return airfare. We'll give you a one-way ticket, because, you know, they wanted me to go there and commit, you know. So I thought, well, I can either knock this back and probably regret it for the rest of my life, or give it a go. You know, either going to work or it's not. If I end up being stuck in England with nothing to support myself, well, I'll just have to find a way. But, so I went, you know, and, you know, I got picked up from the airport. I was still wearing a T-shirt and a cotton jacket. It was freezing cold, man. They picked me up from the airport at Heathrow there, and as we were driving into London, they stopped off at a pub and they said, look, you've got to learn how to drink English beer. And 48 hours later, I was in the studio and did 2 sessions over 2 days and recorded the vocals.
Did you have were the lyrics already written, or did you come up with those on the spot? How did that come
No, they had everything already written. You know, they had the songs already sorted. But I'd arrive at the studio and they'd hand me a sheaf of papers. So, there's the lyrics to this one. Away you go, son.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, but I didn't find it particularly difficult. I was match fit, and full of my own brilliance.
And how long after you landed and went to the studio did you start gigging with them?
Quite soon, actually. We actually started rehearsing after I'd made done the vocals on the album. So I had to sort of learn to play the songs with the band at that point, So we did a fair amount of rehearsal, and then we started doing a few shows around. But once the album came out, we started doing quite a few gigs. It's mainly around London and a few things out of town, and it just grew from there.
Now, this is London in 1977,
yes.
I want to say.
Yeah.
Right when punk is starting to make itself known.
Yep.
How did that affect what the Count Bishops were doing?
Well, I think it didn't harm us at all. You got to remember, you had bands like Eddie and the Hot Rods, Dr. Feelgood, and a number of other acts like that, which were rhythm and blues bands, rhythm and blues pub bands.
Right.
But they were taking a very minimalistic approach to what they were doing. It was more about the energy, aggression and energy, which really it was the forerunner of the punk scene. We were considered to be a punk R&B band. A bit like a mongrel, you know what I mean? A bit of this and a bit of that.
Well, almost like a transition kind of into that. Yeah?
Well, we were sort of running parallel in many ways, The punk scene was going off, and that was mainly the sort of, it was really a fashion thing more than anything, But, we used to get the punk crowd to our gigs, and vice versa. It's... at the end of the day, I think that whole punk thing, and to a certain degree the R&B pub rock scene in England, was like a kickback against the way that music had become so formalised. You got all these hair bands and then,
prog and...
all that stuff, which, one of the things about rock and roll especially that I remember from my youth was the idea that anybody could do it. Okay, you didn't need to be Segovia to get up there and play guitar in a rock and roll band, and this appeals to because we were the same age as our audience, and they would see us, and they wouldn't be thinking, "Oh man, those guys are such fantastic musicians! Wow, amazing what they can do." They would just think, I really like this, and I think I can do it. You see, there's a crossover between the audience. There's a melding of the audience and the musicians themselves. Same age, same interests, but it became more and more corporate, and it's continued to be so. And this takes away. It's like some bloke, 40 years old, sitting in his office in the record company, deciding what kids are going to like. I'm sorry, mate. That's not right. That's not the way it works.
That's right.
The kids that support this sort of stuff, they like to feel that you and them, we're part of the same community. Your David Lee Ross, I don't mind David Lee Ross, I like Van Halen and all the rest of it, but that whole scene, it had less and less to do with the kids, and more to do with cabaret, in my opinion. Rock and roll is a DIY art form. It's not an elitist thing.
Right.
Should never be.
It shouldn't come from the top down. It should come from the bottom up.
Absolutely. And that's what was going on. What kids wanted, they wanted to see real people on stage sweating and playing something they could all dance to and jig around and have a great time. And the same with punk. You had the whole fashion thing came in on that as well. Most of the punk bands were bands that weren't good enough to be R&B bands.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, the Sex Pistols, for fuck's sake, man. Really.
It's more of a spectacle
Yeah, it's like a circus act, you know what I mean? Like jumping around and spitting on everybody. I call it as pricks, you know. Whoa, you know. But you know, the first band I saw live when I arrived in England to start work with the Count Bishops, we'd done a recording. I'd put down my vocals, and Johnny, who's an American guy, the lead guitar player of the band, he said, the Pirates are playing at the Nashville Rooms in West Kensington. We should go along, man. Oh, great band. And I thought to myself, the Pirates? They must be a bunch of old fogies by now, you know. God, what do I want to go and see them for? And I almost said no. I didn't want to go. But I went because I was the new boy and I thought I'd better go along with the crowd.
Yeah.
You know what? They were fantastic, man. They were really bloody good. You know, 3 blokes, tight. Oh, man, they were tight. And so exciting, you know. I thought, man, I've got to get my head around this. You know, I've been getting dragged down the wrong roads here. I need to get back to reality because you got one bloke playing guitar and he sounded like 3 blokes playing guitar. You know, and I'm not talking about boom to boom to boom. I'm talking about you know. Do you know the Pirates?
I do not.
If you get it,
I make
check them out on
right
YouTube. Check them out on YouTube, man. I think there's only one guy alive now. Okay. But you'd remember Johnny Kidd and the Pirates?
I've heard the name.
Well, Johnny Kidd, of course, died in an accident years and years ago. But the Pirates carried on. They'd been basically in retirement for a long time, and they came back out again. And, you know, I was blown away, you know, and I'm not easily blown away. I'm pretty cynical about, you know, I can stand there and think, oh, Christ, I could be better than that, like every other guitar player, you know. But they were just fantastic, you know. Dr. Feelgood, of course, you know. We were in that sort of mode. Aggressive, full-on, leather jackets, sweating like nobody's business, you know. And you know, I always think of music, especially rock, guitar-based music. You know, when you're in a room playing, you're part of a community. You belong to that community. Those people in the audience belong to the same community. We are in this together, not I'm up here, look at me, bugger that, you know, I don't care about that stuff. You know, you're part of it. I can't do this without you, and you can't do it without me. We do this together, not, I'm making $1 million a bloody week, being driven around in a limousine, and for God's sake, don't let those pricks into my dressing room. No. You know,
the audience has to look at the performer and see part of themselves.
Absolutely,
in that.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to see, you know, a show, traditional show, go along and see Cher.
Yeah, Celine Dion.
Yeah.
So we recently had Paul Gray on the show from Eddie and the Hot Rods, and he was talking about the friendly rivalries between bands there.
Yes.
Did you find yourself in the Count Bishops in some of the, I mean, again, friendly rivalries?
Friendly, yeah. You know, it's interesting because one thing I thought when I went and got involved in things in England was how much more relaxed the bands were towards each other. In Australia, I always felt there was a lot of serious competition, you know, between bands here. Maybe it's because the pool is smaller and the fish all wanted to get bigger. You know?
Right. Okay.
But there was even though there was competition in England, there was a lot of camaraderie as well. You know, in Australia, we might play with on a bill with 2 other bands, and they wouldn't speak to us. Okay. We wouldn't speak to them.
I heard at some point there was even active sabotage.
Access. You're talking about the Richie Blackmore Rainbow.
I've heard
thing?
that, but that isn't the only one. Yeah.
Well, no. I mean, I can't remember other specific incidents. That one always sticks in my memory because I just thought to myself, you know, these blokes, the band that he had, were all pretty cool. Okay, but he himself, I just didn't get him at all, you know.
That's his reputation out there. I mean, everyone we've had on the show who's dealt with him, or any interview I've heard of people who've dealt with him, if they're not married to him, then they've got some pretty broad things to say.
The first show we did with them was at the Hordern Pavilion here in Sydney. And, you know, the backstage area there has about 4 or 5 dressing rooms, one large one and a number of smaller ones. But you know, the walls between them don't go all the way to the roof. So you've got, they're like cubicles without a roof. Now, Richie Blackmore had his own dressing room, which he didn't share with any band member.
Right.
The band, all the rest of his band were in one other dressing room together. Yeah. Now, I don't see how you get any greater degree of camaraderie and togetherness when you're standoffish to your own band.
Right.
You know, I mean, you're supposed to be mates. You're all in this together, mate. Now, what's going on? Anyway, it just so happened that we were in a dressing room that was next to the one where Richie Blackmore was. And, you know, we were getting ready to go on stage. Oh, I got another beer. Oh, yeah, mate. Oh, you know, all that's going on.
Lots of energy.
Right. Yeah, we were building the energy and having a right old time. And next thing we know, a telephone directory comes sailing over the partition and lands bang in the middle of where we were standing. Okay. This is Blackmore, upset because we were making too much noise next door to him. Okay. He threw this thing. Anyway, our tour manager at the time, who was quite a stroppy guy, decided, well, I don't got to stand for that, and went down, banged on his dressing room door and fronted him about it. Okay. And I think that the relationship between us and Richie was pretty much soured from that point on. But, you know, we did a show in the Festival Theatre in Adelaide with him as well, went on. And while we were playing, 2 things happened. The bass power plug got pulled out somehow. No, that thing was not accidental, okay? And once we worked out what was going on, we just carried on, of course, and we got that going again. While we were playing, Richie Blackmore was in the wings throwing bits of insulation from the roof at our drummer.
You could actually look up and see him doing that, yeah?
Oh, we just looked to the left and there it was. There it was. You know, there's you know that sort of fibre insulation things people put on ceilings and that with all the little holes in it, you know? There were lots of scraps of that laying around. Obviously, they'd done some renovations recently. Yeah. And he was picking it up and just throwing it at our drummer.
What a child.
Well, you know, how can somebody in that position be so insecure that they try and fuck up the support act? What's that about, man?
Right.
You know, you don't have enough faith in your own ability to sort of, you know, hold the show afterwards or something?
Well, they're trying to bring the energy so you have a better show. You guys were doing him a service by getting the crowd to where they needed to be for them.
Well, at the end of the day, we were serving our own purposes, of course, you know.
Well,
but let's not lose sight of that. But
that's
you know,
the purpose of an opening band is to, you know.
Well, yes, yeah. You know, I've tended more and more over the years to avoid doing those kind of things because I really don't think that they do the support act very much good at all. Yeah. You know, it's, you know, they sell you this idea, oh, you should go and do this tour with these guys because you'll get the, you know, you'll get some of their audience or something.
Right.
Well, that doesn't happen. You know, it's very rare if it does. And usually you're treated like an unwanted guest. You know, things like they don't give you the full use of the PA system. Right. You're only allowed to use half the lights. You've got to sit up in front of us. And by the way, make sure you don't scuff out that mark where so-and-so's got to stand. Right. You're like, fuck, man, you know. Come on. You know, I hate that sort of thing. And, you know, besides anything else, I like to be doing my own show, doing my own gig. I want to be able to stand there and tune my guitar as long as I need to, you know, whatever it happens to be. And I don't want some prick saying, come on, mate, you only got 5 minutes, you know. Go away.
Now, when you opened up for Black Sabbath on their tour of Australia,
you
guys were label mates, really.
Yes.
Did you get along well?
Never met them.
Okay.
I don't know about. I know that John, our guitar player, actually snuck into their dressing room at one stage to check out Tony Iommi's guitar. Okay, which when he saw nobody was around, he actually picked it up and had a feel of it. Now, John and
both played SGs.
They both play SGs, and John was amazed because he couldn't believe how light the strings were. It's like bloody rubber bands, right? Because John used pretty heavy gauge strings. But the other thing was that at that particular time, my involvement with Buffalo was right on the edge. We were almost at the point of breaking up because we'd, just got tired of the fact that we weren't getting any sort of support from the local industry. And only did those shows because we had an album coming out, which was already recorded, and being on the same label, the record company said, "Oh, you should go help to promote the album." Blah blah blah. As it happens, we went very well. But I was actually already singing in another band at that time, and so
that wasn't the Bishops.
No. It was a band called Mr. Madness, believe it or not.
Okay.
Which didn't last very long. But I'd been rehearsing and doing gigs with this band, and so I'd rock up to the Horton Pavilion, get up and do a Buffalo set, jump off stage, grab a cab, and go straight to Checkers, where I would do 3 sets with Mr. Madness that night. So I never even got to see them play.
Oh, okay.
Never got to see them play.
Is this around the time, because you had a solo single, I don't want to spoil the party.
Oh, I don't want to talk about that.
No? Okay.
No, I'm prepared to go there. That was, once again, all the way along our career with Phonogram, they were always trying to somehow get a commercial single out of us.
Right.
Even to the point when our 3-year initial contract period was up, they wanted to extend the contract, but they only wanted to sign me. They didn't want to sign the band. Their opinion was as long as they had the front man, that's all they needed.
Right.
Now, I had to explain to them that that's not the way it works. Okay. I said, look, guys, you either sign the whole band or you don't sign any of us.
Right.
Because bands are very organic things, You can't just...
There's a magic in there.
Yeah. It's these particular people in this particular ensemble doing this stuff that works. You change one of those, and I know this from bitter experience, it's no longer the same. And it will never be the same, But at the same time, they wanted me to do a single. I wasn't happy about it, and after I did it, I was even less happy with it. It was just bullshit, man. What? I felt, what's the word? It was just, the easy way to say it, just felt creepy to me, I thought,
you feel kind of used, I guess?
Used, yeah. I don't like people telling me what to do for a start. Never have. Ask me if my father was around. You could ask him that. But, it just seemed completely wrong to me. I didn't want to be the next JPY, John Paul Young, or the next Darryl Braithwaite. I don't care about that stuff, Nonetheless, I did it under duress, and basically ended up how I expected it to end up, and that was it died a death. And luckily, I never heard from it again until you brought it up.
Sorry to bring back those memories there, Dave. But I'm just looking at your, we talk about records here, recorded history, and you brought up this Mr. Madness?
Mr. Madness, yeah.
Okay, all right. You came back to Australia at one point with the Count Bishops, but known as the Bishops, is that right?
Yeah,
How did you go from Count Bishops to the Bishops?
We'll be back after these messages.
Hey, have you checked out AudiofileUSA.com lately? There's been a major new website redesign, and now it's even easier to search and dig for deals. AudiofileUSA.com has over 42,000 used vinyl titles in stock, all excellent and near mint condition. They sell nothing but the best condition records. And AudiophileuSA.com is not just for rare and collectible records, it's got something for everyone. All genres, from punk to pop to jazz to classical to metal to psych and more. Head over to AudiophileuSA.com, dig for the deals, fill up your cart, and use discount code The Vinyl Guide to save 10% off your purchase. There's something for everyone at AudiophileuSA.com. And I know that Groove Washer makes the world's best record cleaner. Hundreds of people around the world have tried it and given Groove Washer top ratings online, including Rolling Stone magazine, 5 out of 5 stars for vinyl record care. But have you seen the new Groove Washer Groove Guard record sleeves? Now you can slide your freshly cleaned record into an archival quality sleeve for short or long-term storage. I mean, why are you going to clean your records only to slide them back into the same old dirty sleeve? That's like showering and putting your dirty clothes back on. Head over to GrooveWasher.com, grab a record cleaning kit and some Groove Guard record sleeves, now at a super low introductory price, and it gets even lower with discount code VinylGuide10 at checkout. That's Groove Washer Groove Guard record sleeves, GrooveWasher.com, discount code VinylGuide10.
Now we return to the program, already in progress.
No limits.
You came back to Australia at one point with the Count Bishops, but known as the Bishops, is that
Yes,
right?
yeah, that's
How did
right.
you go from Count Bishops to the Bishops?
Well, really, it's like, what do people call the Rolling Stones?
Yeah, the Stones.
It's sort of like, people naturally shorten the name to the Bishops,
Right.
for a start. So the record company and all the rest of it just decided, well, we might as well just call it the Bishops,
Mm-hmm.
I preferred the Count Bishops, but wasn't going to argue about it,
Mm-hmm.
A band by any other name would still be the same bloody band,
Right.
Very sad that, we were really starting to hit our straps, in my opinion. We had, the first album went well, and then we did the live album, which was recorded at the Roundhouse, which was is a lot of fun, A funny story about that. You know who Lemmy is, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Lemmy Wills.
Absolutely.
Well, they were on the bill as well, Motorhead, but this particular gig, they called themselves Iron Fist and the Hordes from Hell because they were under contractual obligations not to work under their own name. But anyway, Lemmy, he had his habits. And one of those habits was quite a large intake of speed.
Mm-hmm.
So we were all backstage there prior to the show at the Roundhouse, and Lemmy arrived, because we'd done quite a number of gigs with Motorhead anyway. But he arrived backstage just before we went on to play with a, one of those plastic Ziploc bags, half full of speed.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he's got a necklace on with a copper tube hanging out of it. So he went around the whole dressing room, sticking the copper tube in speed and shoving it up over his nose. Which, okay, Lemmy,
Very on brand for him.
Anyway, and when we went on stage, man, we were hyped, let me tell you. We played all these really fast songs, about half a minute fast, okay? Talk about energy. It was never intended to be a live album. It was just, recorded on a Manor Mobile, the whole show. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, our record company guys said, that's pretty good, man. We put the as a live album. You should take it into the studio, do a mix, maybe fix up a couple of bits and pieces, a bit of editing here and there. Anyway, so we go into the studio and start, doing the mix. And one song we're mixing, and Johnny, he says, "Oh man," he said, "Oh, a couple of bad notes in that. I'd like to replace that solo, put a couple of bummers in there." So I said, "Okay, Johnny, set it up and try to replace it." Anyway, he tried about 5 times and he could not keep up with it. He couldn't keep the pace up.
You had to call Lemmy back for that.
No. Lemmy was out of town somewhere. So anyway, we just had to leave the original solo on it. You had to live with it. But, I listen to that record now when I do listen to old stuff. And I can't pick the mistake anyway. It doesn't matter. You can just say, "Wow, listen to that. These guys are going hell for leather." Yeah. Well, I've always liked that. The thing about recording, especially as the technology got more and more sophisticated, too often I think that the whole reason that you're being recorded got lost. You're dealing with people too often, engineers and producers are so in love with the technology that they forget it's just a tool, right? It's like that is their ends. That's their ends as far as they're concerned, is messing with all these knobs and dials. The idea of recording is to actually record something, okay? And you record a moment. This moment may never be repeated, okay? It's a one-off thing. You might take 15 takes to get it, but nonetheless, I prefer to record a band playing together. I don't like, let's do the drums and the bass and we'll put the guitar on later and layering it all on. It's wonderful, marvelous that you can do that. But to me, that organic, melding of the musicians together to make their own unique sound, rather than trying to make something which is like a simulacrum. Is that the word? Simulacrum of a live thing. That doesn't work. Right. It's why so often you say people, "Oh man, their records don't sound as good as they do live." You hear that all the time, don't you? Yeah. It's because it's not recorded with them playing live. It's made piecemeal. Yeah. So you immediately lose that indefinable little thing that makes all the difference between you and the blokes who play in the garage down the road. Yeah.
It's that real-time alchemy.
Yeah. You record a moment. You don't synthesize a moment. You don't make that moment. You allow it to happen, and you record that moment.
When you look back at your catalog, what is your, proudest moment, your proudest achievement in your recording history?
That's not an easy thing to quantify, really. I think I'm like most people who have any knowledge of Buffalo, for instance, that Volcanic Rock, I think, is my favorite Buffalo album. Only Wants You for Your Body second, Dead Forever third. The other two, take them or leave them as far as I'm concerned, really. I don't hate them. I don't feel any sort of regret about them. It's just that it's not Buffalo to me in many ways. Great players. I can't say anything bad about any of the players on those records. It just wasn't Buffalo anymore. Right. You start out with a vague idea of what you want to do, and hopefully that idea crystallizes as you go along, and you should come to recognize this is us. You become, so yourself, okay? And then, as I say, your knowledge of yourself becomes fractured by other people's input, other people's advice, suggestions, orders. To me, that's just crap. No. Maybe I'm a bit sort of inflexible. I don't know, but I don't get the whole corporate thing about it at all. I understand that you need corporations to market things because they've got the money to spend and all the rest of it. But when they start sticking their nose in and telling, it's like saying, listen, Mr. Van Gogh, I don't think you should do the painting like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Too much blue, Picasso.
Yeah, what the hell, mate? If you don't like it, then disassociate yourself from it. Go away. I don't need you pissing in my ear telling me, I should be doing this. And believe me, over my years of doing what I've done, I've had more people than you can poke a stick at telling me what I ought to be doing.
So from this point forward, like, what is there left to do? What do you have in your plans that you'd like to accomplish?
The first thing I'd like to do is see my next birthday.
And when is that?
Christmas Day.
Okay, all right.
These days,
you're looking healthy. You're looking good. Well, so I'm going to assume that's a yes.
Well, I'm hoping so. I just hope, my first ambition is to rack up a few more years of being here on planet Earth and breathing. Mm-hmm. When it comes to you're talking about a career, well, I don't really worry too much about that. Mm-hmm. I've reached a stage now where all of the business side of things that I've been part of in some way or another, the striving, I really don't care at all. Mm-hmm. All I want to do now is continue to play music for as long as I can. And that's what I started out wanting to do as well. Mm-hmm. Not only would I want to do that, but I want to play music that I like and that I enjoy doing. And I don't really aim for huge concert stages or any of that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Been there and done that, and not always a very nice experience. I've played to crowds of 35,000 people, Melbourne showgrounds, Sydney showgrounds, all these sort of things, and it's okay if what you need in your life is a big ego stroke and say, look at me, I'm up here on this huge stage. Well, okay, that's fair enough. But I don't get off on that particularly. Mm-hmm. What I do get off on is connecting with the people in front of me. And usually on those big stages, you're so far away from people that connection is almost impossible. I like to see the whites of their eyes, okay? Mm-hmm. And I like them to see, but, I like them to see me close as well. Mm-hmm. Connection, community, what I mentioned before. Mm-hmm.
Now, I know you're still playing live,
yeah,
and that's great. And people who are in the Sydney area or can make their way to the Sydney area, you said it's every other Sunday?
Second Saturday of each month.
Saturday each month.
The next, and we do an afternoon thing on a Saturday afternoon, mm-hmm. which is, for people of my vintage, that's very civilized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I've always been open. When opportunities present themselves, I've generally been interested in taking those opportunities. Mm-hmm. So if opportunities come along, I'm not going to say no.
Right.
As long as it's something that I feel I'll be comfortable doing. You won't see me doing, the Las Vegas type gigs. Mm-hmm. Never will.
Would you like to record again?
Well, I will record again when the time is right. It won't be with a major label or any of that sort of business. It'll be something I do myself, with my musical cohorts. Look, I'm currently negotiating and finalising an agreement with an American label, as it happens, called Ripple Music, mm-hmm. who are basically a hard rock, stoner, doom metal label over in America, because the guys that run the label are Buffalo fans, and they've been trying to find some way that they could do a deal so they could reissue the Buffalo albums on vinyl in America. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's not really possible because Universal will not let anything go. They won't.
So you've made overages to Universal about having them...
We would need another hour and a half for me to tell you the story behind all this, okay? Believe me. Universal, like most record companies, they like to keep control of the copyrights of the stuff that they have in their archives because they're always looking towards the future. There may be a day when suddenly this will be, mm-hmm. whatever. Anyway, it wasn't possible to do that. But the last time I did a Buffalo Revisited gig, you may be aware mm-hmm. of those things that I've done on occasion, always. Yep. It's nice to revisit now and again. I wouldn't want to do it too often. But the last one we did was in 2018, and it was recorded through the mixing desk. So we've got a live recording, and I've got video to go with that as well. And that was the 45th anniversary of the Volcanic Rock album release. And when it became obvious that we wouldn't be able to sort of, do a deal on reissuing the old records, I said, well, look, I've got this stuff that's recorded live. And they said, oh, well, we might look at that. So I sent them over what I have there, and there's somebody currently mastering it in the States as I speak.
Phenomenal. These are the gigs at the Bridge, right?
No, this one was at the Bald-Faced Stag, which is called the Crowbar now.
Yep.
We also did shows at the Bridge a couple of years before that. That whole Buffalo Revisited thing, it was never crossed my mind that I would ever do that. I'm not one for sort of revisiting old glories.
Yeah.
I'm always sort of, whatever I'm involved in at the moment is what monopolise my thought processes and my ideas. But initially, that all came about because the promoters of a festival which was running once a year in Melbourne and in Sydney, contacted me direct and said, look, we'd love to get you, Dave, would you come along and do some Buffalo stuff, My first thought to that was, wow, can I still do that? Do I want to do that? Excuse me. But anyway, they actually sort of offered a fee that I thought, well, I can't really say no to that.
I absolutely can't do this.
So I actually sort of, quickly assembled a bunch of guys, great players, that and whacked together a set to do it. And I must admit, I was shocked and surprised at the reaction we got. Yeah. We played it was the Manning Bar at the university where the show was. And, I looked out at the audience, and there were people there close to my age, but most of them wouldn't have been born when we made our records, And yet, they were singing the choruses back at me, and I was blown away. I thought, wow, what's going on? This is ridiculous, And within days, we were asked to go and do a show down in Melbourne, and the same thing happened there. Over a period of time, once we'd done those, I thought, well, okay, that's probably the end of that, and let things slide. But over the next couple of years or so, things have come up every now and again. There's a Brutality Festival down in Melbourne that they wanted us to go and do that. And I've put different lineups together each time because, good players, you can't always have them at the drop of a hat. The last lineup with Steve Lorcan on bass, Troy Vod, Scary, his real name is, on guitar. Great, fantastic. And the drummer we got in is Marcus Fraser, and he was 21, I think, at the time. So I introduced him as the old man of the band. Well, the rest of us were, I was into my 60s already, of course, and Steve would have been, late 50s. I think the guitar player, Troy, would have late 40s, maybe early 50s. Well, there was a really good, strong lineup, and that's the one that was recorded. And I'm really quite pleased with that, To be honest with you, the recordings that I'm most happy with or the most proud of and still listen to are the live stuff from the Count Bishops and some other live stuff that after the Count Bishops came to a grinding halt, I started with a bunch of guys called the Cobras in London with GP Mayo, who used to be the guitar player, and Dr. Feelgood, bass player from 9 Below Zero. It was a bit of a sort of floating lineup, but we used to rehearse in the rhythm guitar player's basement in Twickenham in London. Started out just, we were all guys who'd been in bands that had broken up or we'd left or whatever. And it's just like a social thing, really. But we used to rehearse in this guy's basement, and it just so happened that he had an 8-track recording machine behind a glass wall, like that sort of thing, which we had no idea, but every now and again, one of his mates would go in there and turn on and record it, just at rehearsals. And you know what? It's one of my favourite albums.
Wow.
It never was intended to be an album. I never even knew it had been recorded until 15 years after I got back to Australia. And the drummer, Nigel, contacted me. He said, I've got these tapes. I'll run off a copy if you like of the old Colbert rehearsals. And I said, oh, I love that, you know. So he sent me this thing over, CD of it, and, you know, I listened to it and I thought, oh, God, this is fucking great. You know?
It was never released. It was just rehearsals and...
Well, no, it was never released, but at the moment, it's fast approaching release as I speak in the UK. Right?
Wow.
Yeah, it's all been sorted out as we speak.
Now, I would imagine you have quite a treasure trove of recorded material, unreleased.
Well, there's a fair amount, laying around. You know, I mean, I still write songs, of course. You know, I'm still writing songs, and some of those that I do now with the trio that I'm playing with. In fact, you know, I just read out some new sets yesterday, and there's about 19 or 20 of my more recent songs, which will be in that, and some of them have been recorded. I did a Dave Tice band mini album called Enabler a while ago with the band lineup that I had. Some of it's not, but it will get round to being recorded. And I've got other songs that are sort of continually in work, you know.
Now, Dave, you've been very generous with your time, so thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, mate. You know, it's my pleasure. You know, there's one thing I like to do is talking about myself.
Oh, you're more than welcome to do that anytime. I like talking about you too. I was just talking about your works to a friend of mine who owns a record shop in Sydney, and I said, "How come Buffalo records are so damn expensive these days?" And he said, "Because everyone who gets them loves them and doesn't want to sell them. So there's very few left out there." And when you find
that's nice, isn't it? You know, and you know, I get contacted on email and Facebook and all that quite regularly, and it's surprising how many young people, I mean, much younger than me, like the stuff a real lot. They've been introduced to it by their father or something, and it's become their favorite music. You know, completely different generations. But, you know, I really believe that there will always be a market for that kind of music, you know, because there's a certain need in people, and especially when they enter their teens and early 20s, to find something that they can connect with that isn't accepted so much by the older generation, and that you know, is played with passion and commitment. We always did that, you know. As I said before, it amazes me that here we are, 50 years later, talking about these things. Never crossed my mind that this would ever happen.
It's really important to a lot of us. It really is.
Well, it's a nice thing, isn't it? You know, I find it's kind of humbling, you know, when people, some 20-year-old guy comes up and says, "Oh, you know, I've been listening to your music from my dad's record player, and I love it. You know, I'm trying to find the other label." Man, you know. Surely there must be bands out there of their same age group that can do the same thing. Surely, you know. Yeah,
I'm sure there is, but there's the charm of it, like you said, the energy that, you know, the way it was recorded, the statements that you made while doing it, that just seems to resonate with a lot of people.
Well, that's what can I say?
Do you still have the records at home?
I do, but the only reason I have them is because my mother kept them.
Okay.
I never kept them myself. Never seemed that important to me.
So the record company would give you some, you sent it to your mom, and then one day you got the box back.
No, they would give me a copy. You know, we'd all get a copy, but almost invariably, well, not almost, invariably, I would send them my latest record to my mum.
Yeah.
Whether she actually listened to them or not, I don't know.
She may have looked at the covers and been like, "Oh my God."
But I now have the full collection of Buffalo records because my mum kept them.
Okay.
And not long before she passed away, maybe a couple of years or so, I was visiting and she said, "Oh, I've got your albums here, you know. You should take them home." And she had a box with them all boxed up and pristine condition, and I said, "Oh, amazing, you know." Good on you, Mum.
Okay, well, look, Dave, again, you're welcome back anytime. And,
well, thanks for having me, Nate. You know, it's and by the way, folks, he does make a good cup of coffee.
Yeah. Was it up to snuff? Was it okay?
If I would have sort of enjoyed it more if I hadn't been talking so much, and it's gone a bit cold.
I apologize. All right, we'll have you back again for a proper cup again. All right,
Good
thank
on
you, Dave.
Thanks, Nate.
Alrighty, there he is, Mr. Dave Tice. Came all the way over to the house, drank my coffee, sat on my couch, and we had a great chat. Can't wait to do it again. Oh, and really quick, if you live in Sydney or can get here easily enough, check out Dave and his band at Butcher's Brew Bar. They play there about once a month. It's in Dulwich Hill. I think you go to butchersbrewbar.com.au. If Dave's playing, you can grab a couple of tickets, and hopefully I'll be there to enjoy the show with you. Oh, and don't forget Buffalo Revisited, Volcanic Rock Live, ripple-music.com. That's it for this episode of The Vinyl Guide. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, please share these episodes on your social media. Share them on Facebook, tweet them out on Twitter. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Sit down for a few minutes with that record buddy of yours who doesn't quite know how to work his smartphone and show them how to subscribe to the Vinyl Guide podcast. They will forever be in your debt, as will I. And we'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. So until we talk next time, get out there and buy some records, people. Cheers.